okay, Lynn Dunn and the Indiana Fever have seen the nonsense that Stephanie White pulled with Caitlin Clark. When Caitlin Clark is going off on versus the New York Liberty, she's calling it hero ball and all of this other stuff.
This is what pressure looks like when a franchise decides to stop pretending that everything is fine. On the surface, the Indiana Fever had a season they could reasonably present as progress. They reached the playoffs. The spotlight grew brighter. The arena was full. National attention followed them almost everywhere. For many teams, that kind of season would give a coach more room to operate heading into the next year. Instead, Indiana brought in Lynn Dunn as a coaching consultant. That is what makes this decision stand out. Not because Dunn is unfamiliar, quite the opposite. She is one of the most established figures connected to this franchise. She has been part of the Fever's story since 2003. She predates the current structure. She understands the organization, its history, its internal standards, and how everything fits together. So when someone with that background is added to the coaching situation after a playoff season, it does not feel routine. It feels like a signal that the team believes progress alone is not enough. That is really the story here. If the franchise felt completely confident that everything was moving in the right direction, there would be no reason to add this kind of layer. You do not bring in a presence like that just to quietly observe. You do it when you want a clearer, closer understanding of what is happening, especially around the one relationship that matters most. And for Indiana, that relationship is between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark. That is where the tension begins. The Fever are no longer operating like a typical franchise. Clark changed the scale of everything. Home games turned into events. Merchandise demand surged. Television interest increased. The team moved from being part of the broader league conversation to sitting much closer to its center.
Is to succeed with Caitlin Clark, the biggest face in the sport, period. That's the job here. And if you can't do it, they're going to get rid of you, and now they have eyes watching you 24/7.
Whether people are comfortable with that reality or not, it has clearly changed the dynamics inside the organization. Clark is not simply another young guard with potential. She has become the center of attention, a major driver of interest, and a player the franchise needs to support in the right way. Because of that, every decision connected to her carries more significance. Lineup choices, late-game possessions, public comments, and even visible reactions on the bench. This is also where, in the view of some critics, Stephanie White may have added unnecessary complications. The concern did not come from a single moment, but rather from a series of smaller ones over time. There were comments that seemed to position Kelsey Mitchell, rather than Clark, as the central piece. There were stretches on offense where Clark appeared less involved or positioned away from the ball. At times, the balance between giving her freedom and holding structure felt uncertain. Aaliyah Boston's role also seemed to shift from game to game. And then there were the optics, which may not determine outcomes, but certainly influence how things are perceived, especially with this level of attention. One moment that drew particular notice came after Clark's standout performance against New York, when it was described as hero ball. For many watching, that did not sound like recognition of a player stepping up, but rather hesitation toward a style that was working in that moment. Then there was the contrast that followed. When Mitchell took a more aggressive scoring approach, the tone around it appeared more relaxed. Fair or not, that difference became part of the broader conversation. And once that kind of narrative settles in, it begins to carry weight beyond fan discussion and can turn into something the organization has to consider more seriously. That context helps explain this decision. From the outside, Indiana's message appears fairly direct. The goal now is to use this rookie contract window the same way well-run teams approach their opportunities before they narrow. That final detail matters more than it may seem at first. Clark is still on a rookie deal, which gives Indiana a level of flexibility that many teams would value. It is a period where a team can be more assertive, add talent around a star, and move forward more quickly than a typical timeline might allow. But that advantage only holds value if the basketball side of the organization is aligned with the opportunity. If the system feels uneven, if roles are unclear, or if the connection between the coach and the franchise player is not fully in sync, then those early and valuable years can quietly slip away. The league does not pause while a team figures things out. Other organizations continue to evolve. Rosters change. Expansion shifts the landscape. New talent enters the league, and financial flexibility can disappear faster than expected. Indiana's advantage is that it already has the kind of player others are still searching for. But identifying that player is only the beginning. The more difficult part is building the right structure around her before that window becomes more limited. That is why this decision feels meaningful. In some ways, the Fever appear to be acknowledging that making the playoffs did not fully address the bigger question. That question is whether Stephanie White is the coach who can guide this team toward its highest potential. Not simply being competitive or respectable, but becoming a team that presents a real challenge to others. Because for a team with Caitlin Clark, a highly engaged fan base, strong organizational focus, and growing momentum, the expectation naturally shifts beyond just being a positive story. The expectation becomes contention. Reaching that level requires more than effort and structure. It calls for a system that clearly centers around its most dynamic offensive player. They become part of a broader evaluation. That, in turn, changes the nature of the job. Stephanie White is no longer simply coaching the Fever, she is coaching with a higher level of visibility. Every decision now sits within a larger framework. The question becomes whether she can adjust, or whether she remains tied to an approach that may not fully match what the franchise is looking for. That is why this situation can feel similar to a structured review process. In more traditional settings, this is often the stage where expectations are clarified, oversight is added, and a clearer record begins to take shape. From there, the outcome usually depends on whether adjustments are made or not. While sports carry more emotion than most workplaces, the underlying process can look quite similar. This is also why Lynn Dunn's presence holds added significance. She is not simply there to offer general advice. Her role, at least from the outside, appears connected to helping the organization answer an important question: can Stephanie White guide this team in the way the franchise now requires? If the answer turns out to be yes, then this period may eventually be viewed as a small but helpful step. White adapts. Clark continues to grow. Aaliyah Boston settles into a more consistent role. Kelsey Mitchell fits into a clearer structure. The offense becomes more defined, and Indiana takes a step forward from being a playoff team to becoming a stronger contender. In that case, Dunn's involvement may later be seen as steady support during an important transition. If, however, the same concerns continue to surface, then the meaning of this decision could shift. It may come to be seen as part of a longer evaluation process, evidence that the organization took time to observe, assess, and respond thoughtfully. Rather than acting quickly, they would be able to show that they identified concerns, monitored them closely. They have made it clear, in a very visible way, that this situation matters enough to be followed closely. And when a franchise takes that step after a season that could be viewed as successful, it sends a message without needing to say it directly. It suggests that trust has its limits. It suggests that the initial grace period is coming to an end. And it places Stephanie White in a position where the second year is not just about carrying momentum forward, but about showing she can guide the team as it truly exists now, not necessarily as it may have looked when she first arrived. At this point, much of what happens in Indiana centers around Caitlin Clark. The attention does, the expectations do, the timeline does, and the pressure does as well. And if the coaching approach does not align with that reality, the organization may eventually look for one that does. That is what gives this decision its weight. It is not simply a staff addition. It reflects the franchise drawing a clear boundary around its direction and signaling who needs to rise to meet it. Now the responsibility shifts to White to show that she can. This move does not appear to be about creating headlines. It reflects an awareness within the organization of what is at stake. The focus is no longer just on preferences, systems, or individual perspectives on the roster. It is about whether Indiana is fully committed to building around the player who has rapidly reshaped the franchise's profile. Caitlin Clark is not a secondary piece in that picture, she is central to it. And when someone with Lynn Dunn's background is brought in to observe and contribute, it naturally suggests that expectations are rising and room for misalignment is shrinking. The situation now becomes relatively straightforward. Either White adapts and demonstrates that she can lead this team in the direction it is expected to go, or the organization gathers enough clarity to consider a different path.